Okay, so starting off, I'm just going to have you look at the camera this time and say your first and last name. Introduce yourself, first and last name, where we are today, and the class you taught, and the grade level.
My name is Vaid. We're in Naperville, Illinois at May Watts Elementary School. I'm a fifth grade teacher in this school.
Great. Okay, so we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge?
Well, our third unit of the year is has to do with ratios and rates, proportions, and we're getting into algebraic expressions and some algebra as well. I think algebra is an overarching theme throughout our studies. As far as preparation goes, what I've done is taken a look at how I can build upon, from the beginning of the year, bits and bits of algebra. But in addition to that, the particular lesson focuses on rates and ratios, but there's always this idea of including algebra or components of it within that. So as fifth grade students, these kids are in fifth grade accelerated math. So my students, they were in fourth grade accelerated math last year, so they took a fifth grade course, and so they had some study in expressions and just looking at expressions, not really solving for equations very much, but just touching upon expressions and evaluating some expressions. So the lesson was built upon that, knowing that they've had some experience with expressions, knowing that they have experience, some experience with ratios, understanding those concepts of comparing numbers and quantities, and so they have a little bit of experience with ratios and rates, not much, but we built upon that in this lesson.
You actually have the easier questions here.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make this lesson reflect the full intent of the standard or cluster?
Well, the standards in this lesson and the cluster, it all surrounds ratios and rates. It's one of the Common Core standards, and this is where I can't remember this part.
Did you want to pass on it, or did you?
No,
Okay.
I know what it is. I just need to look. I have it on my phone, actually. I could look at there.
So again, the question is, talk about the standards or cluster. I'm going to pause it while you. Okay. Did you want me to read the question again?
Yeah, sure.
Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of the standard or cluster?
Well, the standards reflected in this lesson, or the cluster, in fact, have to do with, there's two of them in particular that were in this lesson, ratios and relationships, proportions as well, and then equations and expressions. So both of those are two specific clusters under the Common Core math standards. We, in this lesson, actually studied both of those clusters, or went through both of those clusters and started to build upon those ratios and rates and their relationships. Were targeted in our studies of looking at how when we are examining how long it takes the typical fifth grade student, or when we're examining how much time the typical fifth grade student spends walking to and from the bathroom during the course of an entire school year, we have to look at rates to be able to answer that question. We also need to look at ratios to answer that question as well, and even getting information to be able to answer that question. Getting information on rate of speed walking in the hallway, for example, was one of the ways that we embedded that standard into the lesson. I asked the students to look for new rates and new ratios that would emerge throughout their problem solving and the operations that they did. But to get an understanding of rates, I felt that the students would have to start with ratios first and know that ratios are comparisons between numbers, whereas rates are comparisons between quantities. And so I felt that building upon ratios and letting us get to rates would be a good idea. And we also studied expressions and we studied expressions to build. So we would allow that our understanding of expressions to help us build our knowledge and study equations and formulas as well. So we couldn't get to equations and formulas without studying expressions. And one thing throughout the lesson, or at the beginning of the lesson at least, is that students were asked to create either an expression or an equation or a formula to begin the problem-solving process. And they knew not to start with an expression, but they had knowledge of what that was and were able to know to start with a formula.
Okay, good. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified?
I think the students had the opportunity to speak to each other about their thinking, ask questions to one another. I think I was able to orchestrate that and provide them with, the environment where they were working together and speaking to one another about their mathematical thinking and about what they were doing to solve a problem. They were given the chance to create definitions together, and to look at a question and share, not only their answers or solutions, but really reflect upon their thinking as to, why something was the way it was or why they selected this. So I think giving them the opportunity to, or guiding them in conversation, was one of the core indicators that I felt was, best reflected within this lesson. And that's something that the kids are still learning to do, to have conversations, but I'm their guide, and as reflected, as part of the shifts in mathematics, really giving the kids the opportunity to talk to each other about their learning and their mathematical thinking is something that I, want to continue to do. And I think it's just developmentally for these students, they come into the school year maybe not necessarily being very articulate or expressive, but eventually in time, through more practice like this, they have that opportunity.
Good.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
There was something I wanted to add to that with the shifts.
We're going into the shifts right now.
Okay.
You mean for the core action?
Oh yeah, the core, the reflection part,
Okay.
like what was reflected best.
Which of the core action indicators do you think?
Yeah, I also wanted to add something.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to ask
Yeah,
or
you
okay.
can ask that.
So which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified?
Well, another core action indicator that I think this lesson best exemplifies is, having students be able to actually work on real-world mathematical problems, giving them the chance to solve these problems in groups, and giving them the opportunity also to apply what they've learned already in solving this problem, and allowing them a variety of solutions. There was no one correct way that was, particularly taught on how to do this. They all, in their groups, had the opportunity to start, from a similar area and then work their way through solving this. Prior to the lesson, what's not seen in the footage of the film are problem-solving strategies and solutions that we've gone through, and giving the kids the chance to solve problems in a variety of ways and learn from one another a variety of ways to solve problems, which actually took place afterwards. They shared their solutions after the film, and that's not seen in the film. But what I can say is that there were 8 groups, and I would say there was 4 to 5 very different ways to solve the problem, and all the groups actually, all 8 of them wrote different equations, and they approached the problem in a different way. So giving them that opportunity to approach a problem and solve it with a variety of ways is something I feel is reflected in this lesson.
We are interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into the classroom. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Well, I think the major shift is students talking to one another about their mathematical thinking. And I still think students are raw in that they're not like adults where they're going to be able to articulate themselves very well, or it's not going to be natural to some of them. But I think that's something I strive to do more and more this year. And I think in my classroom, students talking to one another about, their mathematical thinking, students asking questions to one another, and students just having a knowledge exchange, exchanging their knowledges and combining their knowledges through conversation so that they can, put their knowledges together and solve problems or learn from one another is a big shift. And I think that opportunity for kids to learn from one another is, definitely something that's reflected in a lot of my lessons. I also feel that giving kids, meaningful problems that they can approach and solve in a variety of ways and then share with one another different solution strategies is something that we do in our classroom quite a bit, whether they're with, really short problems that don't take, too much time to solve, or whether they're with long extended problems like the one in the film. We often have students sharing either with a group that's about the size of 5 or 6 or with a class which is about 28. So there's sharing of information that's going on, and kids are listening to one another about how problems are solved, and they're learning from one another. And I can think back to a lesson at the beginning of the year where we had, there was a problem, and I won't get into it too much, but there were like 11 or 12 different solutions for this problem, and you could hear the oohs and the ahs in the classroom, and we actually voted on strategies that we liked or preferred, and kids were excited to try different ways out of solving these problems.
Okay. Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did the students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics of the lesson, and how do you know?
I do feel the students understood the mathematics of the lesson. I was walking around asking them, questions as they were working. I was also keeping track of notes, I was keeping track of their work on my notes. One thing that's not seen throughout the footage is that the assessment points that I take. I usually take 3 assessment points. One is through a video lesson. That is kind of through the flipped learning process, where that's the initial assessment that I take occurs at the very beginning of the week. So that took place 2 days in advance. Then I get information as they work, and then I get information through an exit slip that wasn't seen through the footage. So there's a variety of ways that I get my assessment information. Some of it's through an online survey like it was at the beginning of the week. Some of it is through an exit slip at the end of the week. And then what you've seen in the lesson itself was just anecdotal notes, my notes in response to their answers to my questions, and so those are 3 different ways that I get assessment. So I do know that the kids responded well to the lesson. I can tell you that they do know how to write an expression. They can define rate. They can solve rate problems. They can solve distance rate problems. They can compare ratios. They can find equivalent ratios. They can find equivalent rates, and all of that. You just can't see it, reflected in the lesson itself, because there's a whole larger, broader component where assessments collected prior to and after the lesson.
Explain how you differentiated in this lesson. Did all students have the opportunity to work on grade level content? If all students did not have this opportunity, explain why.
All students did have the opportunity to work on grade level content. As far as differentiation goes, I have to differentiate for some students in the manner that they work, the organization of their work. Some students need organizers to do their work. Some students need certain supplies ready for them at the beginning of the class. Some students need reteaching that was done prior to the lesson in small groups. As far as differentiating instruction goes, yes, there was instruction that was differentiated in the sense that, prior to the actual application of this work, I was able to meet with students who needed more guidance with, in particular, actually, understanding the difference between a rate and a ratio. and expressing that mathematically. That was one area I feel that I was able to differentiate in, because some students really understood that well, some students didn't. And prior to the filming, and what's not seen is the instruction that's for some, is especially given to some students. More instruction is given to some students for that particular area where they're asked to compare rates and ratios and mathematically express that.
Which behaviors from Correction 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
I think the conversations. I think Correction 3 speaks to, the idea of the teacher orchestrating conversations in the classroom. And, conversations isn't just kids talking. There has to be some relevance to it. Kids have to be talking about math. And they have to have some focus. And, my job is to guide them through that. And I felt that, they were presented, prior to the filming, after the filming, and during the filming, a focus of things to think about, things to talk about. There were questions that I posed to them. And so for the students to share their mathematical thinking and do a knowledge exchange, I felt was well reflected. I'm going to get some water if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm going to have to pop out in, let's see, what time is it? It's not 11.
Those are all
I'm like, okay. I'm going to have to pop out or leave in 5 minutes because we have to be at the other school set up.
Okay.
By 9:15.
That's fine. How many more questions are there?
We're almost there. You're doing good, so we just have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Do you feel like you answered the Correction 3 one?
Yeah, I just want to double check that I was
Okay.
right with Correction 3.
And then
conversation.
The 2
Yeah,
last
that's
ones. Okay, so these ones should go pretty quickly, but great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson, what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well, and what might you do differently?
As far as what I do differently in this lesson, it'd have to go with my formalized note taking. I feel that I should create a more standardized version of questions that I can, or a grid of some sort in which I could keep track of all student responses in an organized fashion. I think my notes as a teacher, they're helpful, but when they're not organized by group or by question, and they're all over the place on a clipboard, that's not particularly helpful to me. So the thing with the way that I collected information, I know I went from table to table asking questions, but I felt that was a little bit chaotic even for myself, and I would like to have a more systematic way of approaching tables and knowing, when to go to which table, and having more of an outline or a plan of when to talk to students. As far as what went well, I think the application process, applying their understanding of rates and ratios, applying their understanding of expressions, building upon the clusters that they learned last year and the standards that they learned last year, building upon rates and ratios, and then applying that to a meaningful real-world problem, and just starting off small by understanding, okay, here's a ratio, here's a comparison between numbers, looking at a rate then as a ratio, building upon this ratio knowledge and applying it to rate knowledge, and then building upon knowledge of expressions, and then learning how to write equations, learning how to write formulas as a result, and really differentiating between rates and ratios, differentiating between expressions, equations, and formulas. I felt that went well, and I felt that the students were able to not only know all of that and understand that, but also to apply it and then find more rates, find more ratios. And then afterwards, not seen in the lesson, students were able to write more equations for, an approach to how this problem would be solved. So I felt that went well.
Okay, good. Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors?
As far as student behaviors, I don't recall any surprises or unexpected student behaviors. I think every teacher could tell you that throughout a lesson, there's going to be high points, there's going to be low points. I felt the students were pretty engaged. I could walk around and see some of their faces. At some point, there might be a lull here and there. But I think the fact that they were able to talk to one another and rely on one another and be accountable for one another through their conversations kept them more engaged than it would have if they were not. So I felt, as far as student behavior, I was pleased with their demonstrations and their actions.
Done.
Thank you.
Thank you.